Hello everyone and welcome back to the Brick Railway Builders podcast, a podcast that is all about Lego trains. This is an interview style podcast where I'm going to be talking with a great many members of the Lego train community, and this is a way of introducing everyone to everyone. Joining me for this episode is Lego train builder SQUID. Hello, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, thanks for asking.
It's so good to have you on. It's so good to see that there is still interest in doing this podcast. It's still early days and we've only got a few episodes in, but the fact that it's still going is still very exciting for me. So to anybody who is new to this podcast series, again, this is all about Lego trains. I have a guest with me for every episode, and I have a series of questions lined up for my guest as a way to lead into conversations and to kind of get more perspectives and understandings of what they do in the Lego train hobby. So, SQUID, please introduce yourself.
Well, I'm SQUID. I've been building Lego trains for several years now, but only recently got kind of serious about it. And I mainly just build 8-wide trains of whatever interests me.
So what kind of train theme or region do you mainly build?
I bounce back and forth between British stock and American stock. Pretty much whatever's got my interest in the current month. I don't really have a preference between the two. It's really just, oh, cool, I found a cool train from, the UK, I'm going to build this. Or, oh, I found one from the US, I'm going to build that. And that sort of deal.
So there isn't really any one set region. You don't solely build American, you don't solely build British then?
No. I very much appreciate having a mix of both because, in my eyes, they both bring different things to the table.
So having built British and American, for example, neither one really sits above the other, so you tend to have a bit of a balance with what theme you tend to build?
I would say American stock has a slight edge just because of my bias, obviously being American. I will say I find British trains easier to build, but other than that, not really much of a preference either way.
That's interesting you say that, because I believe I might be misremembering with someone else, but I think Mike in the first episode said he found British trains easier to build as well. He's also American, but builds Thomas characters, but builds them in a realistic way, so he finds the realistic locomotive basis and builds that. And he also, again, I'm probably misremembering, but I think it was him who said British locomotives are easier to make. Why do you think a British engine is easier to build than, say, an American one?
So, for me, British trains have the running board. And in Lego, that kind of serves as a platform to build everything around. So, if I need to hang something over the drivers, it obviously sits on the running board, so I have a platform to build it on. With American stock, they don't have that. The boiler is kind of the central piece instead of the running board. So everything, all the greebling that you have to attach, it all has to be either part of the boiler or attached to the frames, which makes connections kind of flimsy sometimes. And just for that reason, I find that my British stock tends to be sturdier and easier to build in that sense.
So, do you have any particular locomotive preference? Steam engines, diesels, or electrics?
In terms of American stock, no. I like American steam, diesel, and electric. In terms of British stock, I really only like steam. British diesels, to me, just all blend together and seem kind of bland. Whereas, British steam engines, they're full of character, they've got intricate lining and brasswork, and they stand apart from each other. Whereas, and this is going to sound really stupid, but, comparing a Deltic to a Class 37, it's they blend together to me, or a Class 40, they blend together to me. It's hard to tell them apart.
Yeah, I can definitely understand that, because I rarely do anything diesel related in the first place. So unless it's got, so for example, a Class 08 diesel shunter, that's very obviously different from a 55 Deltic. So those two I will probably be able to tell apart. But there was a video I saw a couple of days ago by a YouTube channel. I don't know if anybody's heard this channel. I don't know if I can even pronounce it. But it's Rurid... how do you pronounce this channel? Basically, he does these massive video analysis videos on, well, what the series is called Motion History, but he's done cars and a load of locomotives. His most recent video is The History of the Super Chief, and that is, of course, an American diesel. But you can identify that straight away because I think American diesels have that standout feature that British diesels don't. Again, you're pretty much spot on when you said British diesels look very samey. It's very difficult to tell them apart. That also reminds me of, I can remember going to a model train show with my dad years ago. One of the displays there had a bunch of engines running. It was, just a casual loop, just loads of trains running, just something nice to look at. And there was a bunch of diesels running. And there was a kid next to me who said, "Do you know what diesel that is?" I looked at him, I said, "Well, no, why didn't you tell me?" Just as a way to kind of let him answer the question for me, because all the diesels look too similar. Again, like a 37 and a 55, which is a Deltic. Back then, I could not tell the difference for the life of me. So, yeah, I think that's definitely a good point in the sense that I think the steam locomotives in Britain have that flamboyance and the colour and the ability to easily tell them apart, but the American diesels definitely have that same factor as well.
I also I have a huge love for the full width cowl bodies on American diesels. Right off the top of my head, there's the F45 and the F40PH. Maybe we can throw a picture up or something, but they are very attractive diesels in my opinion, and they are on the bucket list of models to make.
Yes, I recognise that shape. Kind of a very, is that a modern American design? I don't know if it's modern or so. It's just because when you look at the Lego train sets, for example, that use diesels, this is kind of the kind of go-to shape that a lot of the sets use.
They're not relatively modern. I know that the F40 came out in the 80s, and I believe so did the 45, but I'd have to citation needed. Yeah, they're not modern diesels. They're kind of mid-era, so to speak.
What's funny for me is looking at these two different diesel locomotives. The only thing that can tell them, like, as a way of telling them apart from me, is literally the livery. I don't see like what's the difference between them? Seriously?
Yeah, so I mean they have very similar car body styles. Really, yeah, the real difference between them is one is 6-axle and the other is 4-axle. One of them has the front catwalk area, whereas the other doesn't.
So let's move on to your current Lego train collection. What can you tell us about that so far?
So I will confess that about half of it is digital right now, mainly because building Lego trains is just a gaping hole in my wallet. I've built a lot of Tom's characters. I've got the famous 8 all modeled and ready to go with a few extras. I've got a few standout American steam engines. Right now, the only one I've got built is a New York Central Hudson, which I'm sure you've seen pictures of.
Oh, yes. Streamlined? Is that... Were they always
No,
streamlined?
they weren't all streamlined. Only about 10 of them were streamlined. I've built a unstreamlined one from kind of the later era of their, or later tenure of their life. And then I've got a little tiny saddle tank switcher that's based on an Alco design that is really obscure, and I don't know how it got super popular in the modeling market here, but nevertheless, it's popular, and I decided to build one.
I reckon it was probably just a case of people would see it, recognize, or maybe not recognize the shape, but kind of see it as just a standout model. It was like, oh, that's not like something I've got at the moment. Let's give that a try.
Yeah, I would liken it to the Hornby Smoky Joe model, where that's kind of been put into all sorts of different liveries and reproduced, and whereas the original basis is kind of this dinky looking thing that really nobody knows about. Anyway, I kind of derailed that question.
No, that works. So you say half of your collection is digital. What models do you have, or at least do you plan to transfer these digital models into a brick-built form?
I do want to build. I at least want to make the famous 8 in physical form, and some rolling stock. Beyond that, though, it's just kind of, money withstanding and what I would find practical for, like, a Lego meet or something like that.
So how many models do you actually have brick built then? If you're saying that you haven't, or at least would like to build the famous 8, so are they all digital? What models do you actually have physical?
I have Thomas, Percy, and James. I have Annie, Clarabelle, and a troublesome truck and a brake van. And that's it in terms of Thomas stock.
Anything outside of the Thomas stock that you have brick built, or is that more digital side?
I've got for American stock, I've got, like I said, the New York Central Hudson and the Alco switcher, and then everything else is just digital.
So have there been any models that you have made, like in the past, or as time has gone on, that you've made it, and then you thought to yourself, I don't really want this model anymore, so you scrap it, only for more time to go by, and you look back and you think, oh man, I wish I didn't scrap that model?
No. So back when I wasn't serious about Lego trains, I did scrap a lot of models and ended up rebuilding a lot of models because I only had so many parts on hand to work with. But since I've gotten, serious and started, ordering parts for specific builds, I haven't really scrapped anything, physically or digitally. Although I am on the verge of scrapping something right now. That Alco switcher that I mentioned, well, it's starting to kind of lose its luster with me. And I'm thinking of rebuilding it into a different switcher, which a lot of Thomas fans will recognize, Brooklyn Eastern District number 15, also known as the Strasburg Day Out with Thomas locomotive.
Oh, wow.
So, or at least the locomotive pre, Strasburg modification. And I have a digital model of it. It's just a matter of getting the motivation to take apart the Alco switcher and rebuild it into the smaller, I believe it was manufactured by Porter switcher.
Yeah, I can definitely picture what that model is. And I think this is definitely a case of, if money permits, you would definitely keep the other switcher and then build the other one straight away.
Yeah, I definitely would. The Alco switcher was also kind of a test bed for some experimental features. Most notably because it's got this really big rear overhang, and if I just mounted a magnet on the end of it, it would break the coupling on a curve. So I added this swinging drawbar for the coupler. Well, it didn't work properly, and so now I really can't run the engine unless I run it backwards. Whereas, the Porter, it's got a much shorter overhang. I can just mount a magnet on the end of it and call it a day. So that's another reason as to why. But like you said, money permitting, I would re-engineer the Porter, or not the Porter, the Alco switcher. It's just I don't have the motivation or the money to do so.
That's very fair. And it was interesting what you said earlier, where you didn't have many parts, so you would make a model, then scrap it, and kind of go through that cycle. I mentioned this on a previous episode as well, where I was very much the same. There was a kind of lengthy period of time before, I don't know, maybe 2018. I can never remember what year I actually started making realistic engines, which might have even been 2019. But for the longest time, I would make some arbitrary blue tender engine, some arbitrary red tank engine. It would be built up, I'd make a video on it for YouTube, I'd have some fun with it. Eventually I'd wake up the next morning, look at it and go, I'm kind of bored of that model now. And then I would scrap it and turn it into something else. So yeah, there's definitely that sentiment where it would be just some, you build something, you smash something together, and then you smash it apart like a few days later.
Funny thing about that is the other day I was kind of feeling nostalgic for my old builds, and so I attempted to recreate all the notable ones from memory and from the few pictures I had digitally. And right now they are all saved in a singular file called Old Models.
I think I'm quite lucky in that sense that because I've made videos for YouTube, a video is more interesting in the sense that you could get or potentially see more angles of the same model, where if you've only got one picture of a model, then you're probably going to be a bit stuck with how you would build certain areas, because you can't really, turn the model around or zoom into a point where you could figure out a certain section. And I definitely had that feeling about, I wouldn't say it's nostalgia. I would probably say it was just a bit of general curiosity, where I was thinking to myself, these models I made all these years ago, what do they look like again? Just, trying to remember what I actually made. So I went back through a bunch of videos and kind of just went down memory. It was, but yeah, literally just going down memory lane. And I don't think I would rebuild any past models, because I don't think there's any of them that were actually good, especially compared to what I can make today. But it was very amusing, I suppose, to kind of see what I was able to make back then compared to what I can make now.
Yeah, I also had a similar feeling after I had finished making all the recreations. I kind of just sat back and looked at it. I was like, huh, I can't believe I started back there compared to, where I am now, but here I am. And I mean, I guess that also goes to show that, it doesn't matter if you're quote unquote good at building Lego trains. You will always get better with the more models you make and the more experience you get. It's always important to kind of remember where you started, to kind of contextualize and be like, huh, I'm making something really cool. And, a couple of years ago, I would have thought this was impossible.
Exactly that. I remember, well, maybe not remember, but I can definitely imagine back when I started making real engines, they were only 6 studs wide. And I remember seeing British Bricks and a couple of other people who were making their models 7 studs wide. It's only 1 stud wider, but the fact that you can go 1 stud wider, increase the wheel size a little bit, and it becomes a much more realistic looking engine. I remember thinking to myself, there's no way I could do that. And then I built my first 7 wide model, which was the LNERP2. And it was not as good as I was expecting it to be. Still trying to figure out a couple of things about it. But I thought to myself, oh my god, I've actually made it. I took the step. It's not good, but god damn, this is the best thing I've ever made. And here I am now with my custom giants and my 8 wide models, and there's me going, oh, I could smash this together in a few days easy. So whenever people say to me as well, any advice on how to build certain models, it's not common for people to ask me that, but the past few people who have at least asked me, or have kind of asked around, where on my Discord server, for example, when they say, how should I make this? The first thing I tend to always say to people is, just build 8 wide straight away. Skip the faff. I know you can probably work yourself up to this point, but honestly, at least in my humble opinion, if you jump into the deep end straight away, you will pick up so much so quickly.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that.
So in your collection of models, what is your most and least favorite model that you have built so far?
Right now, I would say my most favorite is a tie between my streamlined New York Central Hudson and my newest model, which is Salty. I am very fond of the New York Central Hudsons, particularly the streamlined variant. I actually have a metal plate of one hanging above my desk. So that's always going to kind of be my bias in my collection. For in terms of Salty, I am so proud of how he came out. He was a model that I almost considered scrapping because I just couldn't figure out how to make him look right. And eventually I just decided to kind of say, you know what? I've gotten this far. I might as well finish him for the sake of completion. And I did, and oh my god, he's turned out to be one of the most beautiful engines I've made at least for my Thomas stock. Yeah, he is definitely on the list of things to make physically. I will say that much.
That's very interesting that you say Salty is one of your favorites, because I pretty much immediately thought back to when I made my version of Salty. I thought to myself, I would like to make another diesel character for Thomas, because, why not? And Salty was up there because it was kind of an easier model to make, but Salty is a pretty cool character. So I remember putting it together and I thought, oh, this is actually going quite well. This is turning out to be a really cool looking model. And when I finished it, I was so amazed that what I built wasn't an ugly box on wheels. I was genuinely really happy with how it turned out and impressed with myself with how I was able to make this. So again, it's very interesting how you say your Salty turned out to be one of your favorite models. So my Salty model is definitely one of my favorite models, especially amongst the Thomas characters that I've built. It's a diesel, which for me is like heresy, but at the same time, it's still one of the coolest little diesel, like small models I've ever made. It's really cool. I think for my salty as well, all of the Thomas characters that I've made have a face on them, but I couldn't find a salty toy to take the face off of. So I've left it to have a realistic looking grill, but I think that makes it look so much better. So I think all these little things coming together has kind of, again, like in your sense where it turned out to be one of your favorites, it just happened to come together so well, and it just now happens to be one of my favorite models too.
Yeah, it's definitely a good feeling when a Lego model just kind of falls together.
When it just
like
works.
in that sense. Yeah.
So what would you say is your least favorites model?
Spencer. With just no questions asked, Spencer. I spent far longer than I should have swearing at Studio trying to get him to look correctly. And I just couldn't do it. I wouldn't consider him scrapped because, the file's still there. I can always, open it up and work on it whenever I want. But it's just like, this is not going together correctly no matter how hard I try. I can't get him to look right.
When you said Spencer was your least favorite, a massive grin just came on my face because I understand exactly that kind of struggle. Because my Spencer model is decent, but it's still a pain in the ass where it's not as refined as it's not as refined as I would want it to be. The firebox area kind of pokes out a bit more than I kind of want it to. The kind of curved pieces I'm using to what would simulate the running board, it's a bit flimsy at one end, and it's just a model that's, well, not Spencer itself, but the LNER A4. I've said this loads of times to other people off camera. It's one of the most difficult models to make in Lego form. Just that overall shape is really difficult to make. One of the first, or rather one of the early 7-wide Lego trains I tried to make was Mallard. And that was a very difficult model to make because that has valances that kind of cover the wheels. And that was difficult on its own anyways. And Spencer doesn't have that. His drive wheels are fully exposed, which is why this version of an LNER A4 that I've made, especially with all of the things I've been able to develop as I've been making more Lego trains over the years, I've made this into an ultimately better model. It's still a pain in the ass to have to make because, again, it's just a naturally difficult shape to get right in Lego bricks. So the fact that you said Spencer was your least favourite, again, I just instantly, I know exactly what you were going to say.
Yeah, and this is going to be kind of an unpopular opinion, but I think that at least, not even just Spencer, just the Grizzly A4, models of the A4 work best as 6 or 7 wide. Because once you start pushing up into 8 wide, which is where I always build, you start getting really funky proportions. Like the front nose needs to be 5 wide to make it look right, and the boiler needs to be 5.5, 6 studs wide. It's whereas if you're building a 6 wide Mallard, let's say I believe it's Smith Movies,
oh yes.
His Mallard looks almost perfect. It's spot on, and it's a 6 stud model. Props to him for making a model look so good at that scale. The economy of scale, so to speak, just isn't there for the A4, and I don't know how to make it work. So Spencer will probably stay in model making purgatory for the time being.
I don't think there is any one good model of an A4, so to say. Not to say that anybody's A4s out there aren't good, but I mean that in the sense that there are a lot of LNER A4s out there, but I don't think there's any one that I really like. I don't even like mine. There's some parts of it, again, like I mentioned earlier, that I want to change and fix, but I can't figure out a way of fixing it without making it look potentially even worse. Like you said, it's basically proportions, having to figure out how wide this, that, and everything else should be. But it's... I think you used the right words there. There's no economy for the A4. It doesn't fit into any kind of build style in any good particular way.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those trains that's just... It looks simple on the outside, but it really isn't.
Absolutely. So even though you have a bunch of digital models that you're going to be making one day as physical models, this might be a bit of a one-sided question. But what models are on your to build list?
So I'm gonna approach this question a certain way and not talk about any models I've made digitally. First things first, I want to make a an EMD wide cab unit, whether it's the aforementioned F40 or FP45, just something, because I love that design of engine so dang much, and I want to have a model of it. It's on the bucket list. I've already tinkered with like trying to make the geometry look right, but I haven't really put any resources into a full model yet. So that is definitely on the bucket list of things to do. I also have. Oh, this is also another one that's on the bucket list, which I'm sure not a lot of people know about. It's another American engine. It is the Timken 1111. It was a 484 Northern class steam engine built by the Timken Company. They're most known for making roller bearings. And it was a privately owned steam engine built for the sole purpose of proving why roller bearings are better than plain bearings. And it went around and it toured the United States. And it's a very attractive engine. It was painted in this kind of dark emerald green with yellow lining and lettering on the tender, and it literally looks like a New York Central Hudson just stretched out. And it's one of those more obscure U.S. engines that not many people know about, and so I that's why I want to make a model of it, just kind of bring light to this unique piece of history. And it's also just a really good looking train. It's also nicknamed the Four Aces because on its headlight, instead of putting 1111, they literally put each one of the each one of the card suits, like hearts, diamonds, clubs, spades,
Oh, I can see in
on the
this picture
headlight.
here. Yeah. Oh, that's some good styling. That I like that. That's cool. I like that.
There is a very good documentary on the Four Aces built or done by a YouTube channel called High Iron. I definitely recommend checking it out if you want to learn more about this engine and its history. It's definitely a fascinating watch, and it's also what got me into the Four Aces and kind of inspired me to put it on the to-do list.
That would be very interesting to see brick built. And I'm still looking at pictures as well, and there seems to be a version of this locomotive that has a doghouse at the back of the tender. Would you be building
Yes,
that? Will you be adding a doghouse to your tender?
yes, I will. I actually have thought of a way to make the doghouse kind of functional, where I would make it be kind of either the interface for the IR receiver or the push button for the battery box. So that's kind of my plans for approaching the tender.
That'd be really good if you could actually, again, in the sense that you can use that functionally to either use it for the battery box button or as the IR receiver. It's a very good way to hide the power functions in a way that doesn't make it look too ugly. It definitely will be better than the coaches, for example, that I have. So the models I make are, well, all the locomotives are unpowered and they are pushed by motorized coaches. It's very ugly just to see this 2x2 stud gap in the middle of the roof where the infrared receiver is just kind of poking out of. So if you are able to actually hide the infrared receiver in the model, then I will be very impressed.
Yeah, all of my models are loco driven. I build my boilers hollow out of like paneling, at least for American stock, and I hide motors in them. And at least for the Hudson, I have hidden the IR receiver in the coal load of the tender, which works out fairly well. So if I can't, for the Four Aces, if I can't hide the IR receiver in the doghouse, it's just going to be hidden in the coal load, like with my Hudson.
So that sounds pretty good. Is there anything else on your to build list, or is it just sort of those models?
It's just sort of those models right now. I don't tend to plan super far ahead on what I'm going to be building because I found that when I do plan ahead like that, inevitably some engine will catch my eye and I'll get drawn to it like a moth to a fire, and it will supersede everything else on the build list and it will become my next build. So I typically don't try to plan more than, 2, 3 models at a time because, inevitably something's going to come along and kind of derail the whole list.
That's very fair. And I remember when I had a to build list, it was about 20 models deep, locomotives and wagons and some layouts updates. I don't even think I tried to be that crazy. But in terms of locomotives, yeah, there was like a long list of engines that it wasn't so much, especially with hindsight, it wasn't so much that I would want to build as a Lego train, but it was more so I would love to see someone else make this locomotive out of Lego, which is why the whole list basically got scrapped. I never really planned that far ahead either. Like, again, that to build list had countless models on it, but none of them got touched. Maybe one of them, or like one or two of them, did get made into a model eventually, but I'm definitely someone who will have a model in mind and kind of go to make that model pretty much straight away. That's how near enough every train that I've built has come to be. And it's also similar where some of the models are more obscure. Like the LMS Fury, for example. That is a one-of-a-kind locomotive. It was experimental. And because of that, it was also an LMS locomotive. So my mind was, oh, that's a couple of good factors. I'm definitely going to make that as a Lego train. And there were some other models that would stand out. I would go, oh, that looks really cool. Yes, I want to make that. And there's enough motivation for me to want to make that straight away. The Giants were definitely like that. These new Giants, at least. Where the second one that I made has, I believe it's called Bullet Nose Streamlining. Basically, it's the same, or at least a very similar design to some of the American streamlined steam locomotives. I think the Dreyfuss Hudson has that design. The Blue Goose that I built has that design as well. And once I made my Blue Goose, I wanted to make something else in the future that essentially used that rounded bullet nose design, which led to me, I had another idea, then another idea came together, and I thought to myself, okay, I've got to make this model now. And that's how I basically make my models. I no longer have a to build list because a lot of the models are very spontaneous. The last model I made was only a few days ago, which was my next giant. But at the same time, before that, I don't remember what the last model I made actually was. It was forever ago, but it was also in the sense that, again, a model I wanted to make was very spur of the moment. It was very, okay, that's cool, I want one, let's go. I don't have a list anymore because after a few days, that list got boring. That list was something I looked at and I thought, oh, that's such a long list. That's going to take me forever to do. So it just disappeared.
Yeah, I definitely had some of the same sentiments when it came to the list, and just after I had made it, I just kind of looked at it with all this dread, like, oh my god, I've got so many things to build, and it turned less from like a hobby and kind of almost became like a chore.
Yes, exactly that. Oh my god. So, because I've been building Lego trains for as long as I can remember, I have made... there was one time where I counted... I remember once, this was years ago as well, where I think I counted to 167 unique builds. So different iterations of models I still currently had. New locomotives that would be built, then scrapped, then built into a new model, then scrapped, then built into a new model. And because I had done that for so long, at least with the models that I had documented and videoed and put onto YouTube, it came to that crazy big number. So now if I went to recount, it must be something like 200, which again sounds so stupid, but I've got the video evidence on my channel. So having made so many models, going through the same process of, all right, okay, here's the base, right, we've got the Technic pins, here's the wheels, here's the 4x8 plate for it all to sit on. Just that beginning process is such a boring chore. Oh my god, there were so many models I thought, oh, I'd love to make this because building the boiler would be really fun. For example, the LNER W1. It was the third Lego train I made 7 studs wide, and it was a very fun model for me to make. But I would love to make that again at 8 studs wide, but it's basically... well, how do I put this? The tender is a shape I've built countless times already, so I know how that's going to go, and there's no challenge or excitement for me there. The wheelbase I've basically made before, and I can use larger wheels and different wheels to make that better and more improved, so that's fine. But I would have to order new wheels in to make this new model, because I no longer have spare wheels in my stock to make this upgraded model. So yeah, it's definitely a case of, okay, I can get around these two areas, and once that bit is done, I can work on the exciting shape of the boiler, yes. But if I don't like it, then I've wasted all this time, I've got something I don't really want. There's even locomotives in, well, not locomotives, but there are a couple of models in my stock at the moment that I'm happy to finally begin scrapping, because it's just a case of, oh, I could, do this and that with them, but it's just boring now. So yeah, the fact you said it's a chore, that was the exact correct word to use, because once you've done something so many times, the fun element to it begins to disappear.
Yeah, definitely. And then you start looking for, models and things to build that have something interesting or bring something new to the table that you haven't done before to try and keep it interesting. Whereas if you have like a whole list of things to do, then it's just then you'll have to add that really cool, exciting model to the end of the list, and then you've got all this stuff to get through before then. And it's definitely chore is the right word.
I think that's where the giants came from, both the original ones from about 5 years ago and these new ones now, because these are all completely custom models. They have some real life elements to them, but the final model itself is completely custom and unique. So I think that's why I have so much more fun making these, because I can do what I want with these models. A bunch of ideas can come together, and that amalgamation can be this giant model, instead of me looking at the same picture of a model I've probably made once or twice in the past, and me thinking, I've already done this, I scrapped the past iteration, do I really want to make this one again? So yeah, it's just, there is a lot kind of to explain from there, but basically, for the listeners, if you want to make a model, be 100% certain that you want that model. It's not a bad thing to look at that model and think, I would love to see someone else make it, because inevitably somebody will. It doesn't matter if you make it, put a picture on Flickr to say, yeah, I made this thing, and then scrap it a day later. That's not a problem at all. But if you want to make a model, or at least have this list of models that you want to make sure that you actually want to make them.
And just kind of pulling from what you said, it was interesting how you mentioned with the giants that they're all custom spur of the moment, and that really motivated you to make them. This is kind of deviating a little from the Lego theme here, but I also make trains in Gary's mod, which is it's a game on Steam, and pretty much all of my trains in there are 100% custom, which is part of the big thing of motivation. And I've actually, and going back on the question on things to build or things that I want to build, I do actually have one of them on that list to build, and I just completely forgot to mention it. It's a custom cab forward I made, and I'm really looking forward to building it. It's going behind some of the other stuff that I mentioned, but yeah, like you said, custom stuff and stuff that you just kind of pull out of your own head, it really adds to the motivation and makes you really invested in, making the model, because you want to make what you're imagining a reality.
Absolutely. So this is a new question for the podcast series. What is your ideal Lego train set?
Well, it's an interesting question. I don't necessarily think there's a good way to answer it, at least for me. My ideal Lego train set would, first and foremost, come with a loop of track, just something to run it on. But going from there, I really don't know what my ideal train set would be. Lego makes so few train sets as it is that there's not really a good selection of different things to pick and choose from. And I don't really feel like it's fair to push what a custom model maker would want onto a Lego set, because, we think completely differently than the people who are actually designing Lego sets. They have to grapple with, costs and, the logistics of making everything work and be functional for a younger audience. Whereas we're more interested in, details and making things look accurate. Aside from, just a loop of track and, a working locomotive that, runs under its own power, I don't really know what else I would put in a train set.
So that was a very interesting answer, and I can definitely respect that. And you said a moment ago that putting onto a Lego set what mock builders can make is very unreasonable, and I absolutely agree with that. What is interesting is I have asked this question to a few other people in a few other places, and they've always kind of said, well, you can't do this much because, again, asking for what a Lego train builder can do on his own with no restrictions, you're not having to worry about budgets and prices and all that sort of thing. It's very, again, unreasonable. But at the same time, it wouldn't be the worst thing ever if Lego brought back, well, at least in my mind, it wouldn't be the worst thing ever if Lego gave the My Own Train theme another run. I, for one, again, I'm not in marketing. I don't really know if this actually will work. I have been told by plenty of people they didn't sell well, so you can save your comments for that. But it wouldn't be the worst thing ever to give a go in the sense that you're just selling a wagon on its own, selling a particular locomotive on its own. You can have a slightly bigger set. Think the Emerald Knight. Just have a version where it's just a good-looking train with one wagon and a loop of track. That's a set. And you would definitely, again, using the My Own Train theme as an example, all of those wagons and those builds are, 20 years old now? They must be. But you could definitely rebuild them to today's build standard in the sense that new bricks have been built, new building methods have been developed. You could definitely rebuild that wagon with modern techniques, and you could potentially give that a go as its own standalone set. There is a market for that, but I did a massive 40-minute analysis video as to why I believe Lego will never do train sets again in the sense that they used to. We'll probably get the annual big train set, but it's always been a case of, I think that the mock scene has just become too advanced. So if anybody goes to see a new Lego train set and they think, oh, it's not as detailed as this train that this person's made, oh, there's so many other things that I've made and I think this is not as detailed, the cost for what you get is not fair. When you see people do reviews, they can pick out all these sort of minor details that become more and more obvious every time you look at that model. And it's not unreasonable for the customer to point these things out. But at the same time, it is unreasonable for the customer to go, why is it like this? Because it's not supposed to be on the same level of detail as someone like you or me can actually build. We are putting so many parts into this one model. If that became a set, that would be a crazy expensive set. So this has gone on for quite a tangent. But basically, I'm basically answering this question as well. So, too long didn't read. I think if I was going to have my own ideal Lego train set, it would have to be something along the lines of the My Own Train series. Just individual things on its own so people can build up their own railway. No, they're not going to be insanely detailed, but that's the point. I would much rather buy a set like that and expand upon it and make it more custom to how I would build than expect something crazy detailed, which is also crazy priced.
And it's funny that you mentioned the My Own Train set, or My Own Train line, because that did kind of jog my memory. I think going back on my answer, I would say that if Lego really does start making train sets again, I think they should take a cue from their sets in the 80s. A lot of their sets in the 80s were not specifically timed to a theme, like the city line or the creator expert line. They were just kind of their own thing. And a lot of them took cues from real trains. The Metroliner set was based on the Amtrak set. It was based on the Amtrak trains at the time. They had the Santa Fe sets, the BNSF sets. I feel like if they kind of did that and kind of pulled inspiration from real life sources, that Lego train sets would sell a lot better instead of just being, Lego City train or, custom thing we pulled out of our butts type thing.
That's a very good thing to bring up as well, because I forgot about that too. The whole 80s and 90s Lego system era of basically the 9-volt era. You don't have to worry about bringing 9-volt motors and track back. Whilst there are lots of people that would love to see that again, there is enough third-party stuff going on where other people are kind of filling in that gap and are satisfying other people to want to do more 9-volt things again. But those era of sets, again, the Metroliner, that's blue cargo passenger train set. It was basically the Metroliner, but the drive unit was no bigger than the 9-volt motor itself. It had it came with 2 coaches. It had lots of windows. It had a very clean blue and white look. The high-speed cargo train sets as well, which was the black and yellow one, that was a really cool thing as well. Just loads of other sets from that era. It's before my time, so I can't actually name the sets, but basically think back to the era where the Metroliner was released. Those kind of train sets would absolutely smash sales today. I really do believe that. And yeah, honestly, I think that would be a good thing to see come back as a Lego set in the future. Do you have a favourite or standout Lego train builder that you are following online?
I do. I have several, actually. First and foremost, Techno Andrew. He was the first person that I really found on YouTube to kind of inspire me to start making Lego trains. So I really have him to thank for the fact that I'm here right now. Glenn Holland is another one. His builds are just super beautiful. Like, he posts a lot of them onto YouTube and his Flickr, and you should, if you have not seen him, you should definitely consider going and taking a peek, because while he builds mostly American stock, and I know a lot of people have reservations about American stock, he makes them look so beautiful. It's amazing. And then another person I follow who I know a lot of people don't know is Nonsense Wars Productions. They have a YouTube channel where they're not mainly Lego train stuff. They post a lot of GBC stuff, but their Lego trains are very interesting, and they actually walk through the design of certain elements and why they made things the certain way, and it's very interesting to look at from an engineering perspective, and their models are just damn good too. So those are kind of my 3 big inspirations for what I do and how I build things. And obviously I'll pull inspiration from other builders that are intriguing me at the time, but those are the main 3.
Seeing as you said Techno Andrew was your main inspiration, I do want to give a quick shout out to a very old YouTube channel called Turbo J UK. Now, I don't know if anybody watching this is going to recognize that name, but this is a channel that has been around for many years, and it must be over a decade at this point, where he uploaded a trilogy of Lego Train sort of like mini movies, I guess. It was called The Trouble with Trains, and whilst it didn't showcase a lot of Lego Train models, it was just this cool mini series of a Lego railway sort of, if you were there watching this sort of TV series, this is what it would be like. It wasn't, that may not be the best explanation for it, but anybody who knows and recognizes the name Turbo J UK will absolutely know what I'm talking about. And the reason why I'm saying all of this now is because recently I remembered that name, I went back and watched those videos, and there are a lot of people who can most likely definitely say, or there are a lot of people that can definitely say that Turbo J UK, despite not being a massive Lego train builder, especially compared to today, is definitely the reason why so many people got into making Lego trains in the first place. I am one of those people, so since we're doing shout-outs or whatever else, thank you so much, Turbo J UK, you are still so cool. So, final question for this episode. What upcoming projects do you have in the works? And if you have any social media pages, feel free to shout them out.
So, I've got all the projects that I've got coming up are the stuff on my to-build list, as previously discussed. I have a Flickr, I have a Twitter, I have an Instagram. Some of my newer Lego projects might not be coming out super quickly, mainly because I'm just coming back from taking a break from Lego, actually. And I'm still kind of getting back into the groove of, making things relatively quickly and consistently having motivation to work on things. But other than that, I do make Gmod stuffs, lots of trains videos, and just kind of little showcases of whatever I'm working on in there. I mean, I've definitely got stuff to look forward to on my pages. So, if any of what I've talked about in this episode has interested you, then, feel free to give a follow. It's just SQUID1562, pretty much everywhere on every social media platform.
I will be leaving links to all the social media pages in the description of this episode, so they will be links below, and make sure you give him a follow. And that is it for this episode of the Brick Railway Builders podcast. Squid, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
This has been a wonderful conversation, and I look forward to potentially having you back on the podcast in the future. So once again, as I mentioned just a moment ago, all of the social media pages for Squid are in the description below. Consider giving him a follow, and if you want to see some more from him, stay tuned. We will BRB with more BRBs. Thank you all so much for listening, and we will see you all in the next episode. Goodbye.
Goodbye.